Hi guys, welcome back. We are here to continue The Lost Bookshop. If you hear any noises in the background, I'm sorry. I try to get it as quiet as can be, but I'm limited on time and we're moving, so I'm doing the best I can. But we left off on page 129, chapter 19, Opaline, Dublin, 1922. My first few weeks with Mr. Fitzpatrick's nostalgia shop were punctuated by a string of strange occurrences. It seemed the building itself did not exactly welcome me with open arms, but I was determined to prove myself a worthy custodian. I ventured up the spiral staircase that led to the attic where we had kept the overflow from the shop. At the top was a tiny door that required me to bend a little, and when I pushed against it, I found that the wood seemed to push back. I stood back in order to take something of a run at it, and on the third go, I burst through and fell flat on my face. I see, I said out loud. Like that, is it? I got up and dusted myself down, trying not to take the idiosyncrasies of an old building personally. A tiny window with a circular pane, opaque with green lichen, was the only source of light. I found a Victrola gramophone and immediately set it aside to bring downstairs. At first glance, it looked like an old museum with glinting treasure peeking out from under dust sheets. There was a telescope in the far corner behind bits of old furniture and lots of boxes. On a shelf, I spotted a pair of workman's trousers and looked down at my impractical skirt, covered in dust and worn in places. Decision made, I slipped it off and pulled on the tan-colored trousers. They weren't a bad fit, and I pulled the belt through the loops, securing it around my waist. Mr. Fitzpatrick must have been a rather slender man, as well as being a conscientious one, as they were neat as a new pin. Slightly too long in the leg, though, so I turned up the hem once and then twice, until I could see the heel of my boot. Catching sight of myself in a cheval mirror, which was amusingly strung with feather boas, I smiled at my reflection. "Hello, Miss Carlyle," I said, turning from side to side. I ran my hands through my hair and held it back, giving myself an androgynous look. My blouse looked remarkably well, tucked into the trousers, and I only wished I had a cravat to finish up the look, like the Parisian author Colette. Perhaps I could also be known purely by my Christian name and conceal my identity. Opaline, however, was not a very common name. "Hello, miss." I spotted a book lying on the dusty floor, the picture of Dorian Gray. "Hello, Miss Gray. Not bad." Keen to investigate the rare book dealers in Dublin City and see what could be picked up, I set out and walked across the humpbacked Ha'penny Bridge, like the spine of a whale decorated with lamps, to visit Webb's bookshop on the quays. Sylvia had mentioned the name to me before I left, and the only way I could retain the information was to picture a spider's web. I took a moment to lean against the iron railing and looked up at the green domes of the cathedral in the forecourts. My eyes followed the river Liffey as it flowed down towards the custom house, which had only recently been burned out by the Irish Republican Army. Joyce had neglected to mention that the country was in the middle of a civil war when he suggested I escape here. From the frying pan into the fire, as they say. Wearing a man's trousers and using a Poseidon, I felt like I was playing the part of an actress. Mr. Hannah was one of those rare types who took absolutely no notice of my appearance and instead filled a box with some popular types to keep me ticking over, as he put it. At the mere mention of James Joyce, it seemed my good reputation was sealed. I had a quick scan through his Dickens collection just in case my father's copy of David Copperfield was among them. It had become a little habit of mine, a way of keeping him close to my heart. It was a rare edition, and I could tell with a glance that it wasn't there. No matter, I said to myself, I will find it one day. Armed with my new books and a list of distributors I could call on, I arrived back at Ha'penny Lane with renewed purpose. I looked around the shop at the rich green walls and the little Tiffany lamps shedding their colorful glow on all the treasures that had held their breath, waiting for the doors to reopen after Mr. Fitzpatrick's death. It almost felt like Sleeping Beauty's room in the tower, and I needed to find the spell to waken her. I had insisted on keeping all of Mr. Fitzpatrick's stock, for the shop would have looked bare with only my small bookcase of titles to furnish it. Yet I had no idea how these two ideas would merge. I first looked at the window display, which hadn't changed in all the time the shop had been closed. If I wanted to entice customers inside, I had to use my imagination. There was a carousel with a winding mechanism which played a jolly fairground tune while the horses elegantly turned around and around. A string of pearls and other costume jewelry were draped artfully over a coffret, and overhead various multicolored hot air balloons with baskets were strung from the ceiling. That was when inspiration struck. I opened the box of books from Mr. Hanna and found just what I was looking for, the Oz books by L. Frank Baum. They were utterly magical and would fit perfectly with the hot air balloons. I would use Mr. Fitzpatrick's curiosities to create a visual storyline for the books. I was so pleased with myself that I hardly noticed the hours passing by as I played what felt like a parlor game of matching books with their props. I had received several Beatrix Potter books, which were always so popular with children, and magically found two little velvet rabbits with bows at their necks. The window now had the enticing look of a treasure chest, albeit slightly skewed towards a younger clientele. No matter, I thought, they were the true pioneers of every family and would lead their parents through any street or thicket to chase their heart's desires. In any case, I set up a little trestle table outside with some cheap secondhand books, which could always tempt the passerby. It was just missing one thing, a sign. I searched for a piece of card, which of course I found in the stationery section, a rich cream vellum, in spite of a beautiful calligraphy pen held on a piece of marble. That was when I realized that I had no desk. I found the perfect specimen, a rich walnut console table, which was currently displaying an alarmingly large collection of ceramic frogs in all shapes, sizes, and poses. That was the amusing thing about collecting. You never knew what would hold value, nor to whom. Were we all preconditioned to love certain things? A moment in childhood lost to memory, but indelibly marked on our souls? To me, the promise of finding what I did not know I was looking for was the lure of the game. That's how I feel. That's why I'm a collector of all things. I dragged the desk over to the corner by the window, so I had good light and a full view of the shop. I found a sturdy carver chair, also in dark wood and upholstered with a deep red and gold brocade. Rather unconsciously, I found myself modeling my surroundings on those of Shakespeare and Company. The memory made my heart lurch, and I wished I could speak to Sylvia, ask her for advice. But I knew what she would say, to trust my gut. And my gut was telling me that it was all well and good, dreaming of printing my first catalog of rare books, but I had to get some customers first, let people know I was open for business. And so I sat at my desk for the first time, placed the card in front of me, and, with the pen suspended in midair, realized I hadn't even come up with a name for the shop. Gray books? I said aloud to no one but myself. It sounded terribly dull. Please step inside and buy some gray books, I chattered to myself, realizing that my new Poseidon wouldn't do at all. I tried to think of my favorite book titles. Wuthering books? Again, such dreary names would never attract customers. I immediately thought of Emily Bronte's Poseidon. Alice Bell? Bell books? Or Bell books to add a little French flair? Perfect, I said, congratulating myself, and in my best handwriting wrote the new name in rare and used books for sale in smaller writing underneath. I put it in the window and nodded my head with satisfaction. No matter what came, I had my books, and in the quiet morning air, I could hear their breathing, patient and steady, like the resonance of a piano note held in the air long after it's been played. Oh, I love this. I jumped when the bell above the door rang shrilly and turned to see my first customer. I've come to buy a book, if that's all right. It was Matthew. I blushed momentarily at the memory of my outburst and how he had held me in his arms. I hadn't seen him since, despite the fact that he lived next door. Well, you've certainly come to the right place, I said, a little redundantly. He moved about the shop, noting the changes I had made with a nod of his head. He was a tall man with piercing blue eyes and blonde hair that seemed to curl at the ends. He held the brim of his hat between his fingers as though he were afraid to leave it down, that if he did, he might wish to stay. What books do you generally like to read? I asked, busying myself with rearranging some stationery. Oh, nonfiction generally, he said, turning briefly to face me before noticing my attire. Are they my father's work trousers? I blushed. I didn't think he'd notice. Not the fact that I was wearing trousers. Everyone who came into the shop noticed that, but that they didn't belong to me. I found them in the attic. I hope you don't mind. Not at all, he said, failing to hide a bemused look. I have some new nonfiction over here if you'd like. I began changing the subject. Oh, it's not for me. It's for my son, Ollie. I had to prize information from him, not because he was unwilling to give it, but because he seemed to think I wouldn't be interested. Was I interested? I felt as though I should be. Women were supposed to be interested in children, after all. Yet it struck me that being a woman was akin to a performance, with its cues and lines that had to be learned. I knew how I was supposed to act and what I was supposed to say. I just wasn't exactly sure I wanted to. He has a vivid imagination, he said, keeping his sentences short yet heavy with implication. You say that as though it's a bad thing, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Matthew, please. Has he read any of the Oz books? I went to the window and took the first in the series down from the shelf. What are they about? Well, they're about a great wizard who lives in Emerald City. I don't think so, miss. Opaline, please, Opaline. His mother wishes him to follow the family business. I panicked for a moment, thinking I would become unemployed and homeless yet again. Her father's business, banking. Ah, I said, looking around the shop for anything that would suit a young banker. Nothing. The silence made me feel uncomfortable until the cuckoo clock announced the hour and made us both jump. Would you like some tea? I wasn't sure why I said it, possibly because I was certain he would refuse, but he surprised us both by saying yes. I went downstairs and put some things on a tray. So is it going well? He called down the stairs. I wasn't sure if he was concerned about the business or my ability to pay the rent. Well enough, I called back. I see you've managed to incorporate my father's antiques with your books. Very clever. I peeped out from the door and saw him standing by the maritime section I had created, with Moby Dick and Robinson Crusoe floating on a blue muslin sea, with mermaids and boats sailing in impossibly tiny bottles. I even had a copy of Peter Pan there, with a toy crocodile snapping at the corners. This is truly fantastic, he said, finally coming to life. The shop seems bigger somehow. I went back to the kitchen and turned on the tap, but no water was forthcoming. The pipes gurgled and belched like someone had bad indigestion. I let it run until it sputtered and clanged, and then was silent. I stood back and put my hands on my hips. It didn't make any sense, just like the attic door or the copy of Dracula falling from the shelf. I climbed the stairs, the kettle still in my hand. Are you wearing your landlord hat today? I asked, holding up the kettle. I'm afraid I might need a plumber. I'll have a look, he said, in the way that men do, assuming the problem is something straightforward enough for them to fix. Before I knew it, he had his jacket off and was down on the floor wrangling with pipes under the sink. I didn't even know there was a spanner, and it seemed highly unlikely that he would carry one around with him. I almost asked him if he was quite sure what he was doing, but instead asked if he knew what the problem was. Probably a blockage of some sort, he said, his voice straining. I'll have it fixed in no time. I'll just switch off the... Before he finished his sentence, the tap flew off the top of the pipe and water began gushing like a geyser. I ran to it and shoved an old rag into the hole where the tap used to be, stemming the tide until he managed to turn off the mains. Perhaps I should have called the plumber, he gasped, getting up from the floor and brushing his wet hair from his forehead. We looked at each other and realized we were both soaking wet. I could feel a giggle slowly erupting from my rib cage, but tried to suppress it, until I saw him wringing water out of the ends of his shirt. He looked so ridiculous. My shoulders began to shake with laughter. He looked up at me, then his cross expression melting into a broad smile. I'm using you, am I? He said as I bent over with laughter. I'm sorry, I said, turning my back to him so that I might stop. When I turned around, he was taking the wet shirt off and wringing it properly into the sink. He had a vest underneath, which was also wet through. Might I hang this in front of the stove for a while? Of course, I said, and quickly added more wood to the fire. I hung his shirt on the back of the chair and moved it closer to the heat. He could have simply returned home. He only lived next door, but there was a silent understanding that the explanation that would have been required was too complicated. My clothes were wet also, but I couldn't change while he was still there. So I merely wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stood beside him, watching the flames. I'll have someone come and fix it first thing tomorrow. His tone of voice had changed again. I knew I wasn't imagining it. This closeness that he would temporarily allow in intimacy before pulling up the drawbridge again. I had to snap myself out of this silly attraction. It was some jumble of homesickness and loneliness, a misplaced focus for all my mixed up feelings. He was kind to me at a time when I needed comfort, but I knew that this was dangerous and had to stop. Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. A moment passed, and as though he had heard some distant noise calling him, he grabbed his still damp shirt and put it on. I responded and jumped to action, picking up his jacket from the floor and handing it to him. Our fingertips brushed as he took it from my hands. I did not look him in the eye, but kept my head level with the hollow where his neck met his chest. I did not think about touching him, but found my hand was already on his chest, above his heart. The rise and fall of his breathing grew heavier, and in one moment he pulled me close to him and our lips collided. Clumsily at first, then passionately, desperately. His mouth was soft and yet eager. The sudden realization of how he felt about me set fireworks off behind my eyelids. Knowing that it couldn't ever happen again, neither of us wanted it to end. I don't know how long we stood like that, buried in our embrace. We did not speak. Occasionally, his hands would caress the back of my neck, but for the most part, he simply held me, enveloping me closer and tighter. I didn't want to move, or think, or wonder what it meant. The intimacy was all I craved, and then it was over. I wasn't sure how or who had pulled away, but we were no longer touching. He thrust his arms into his jacket and buttoned it up. His eyes met mine briefly, and the look was one of fear. I'm sorry. I tried to respond, but found I had no words. My mouth formed the word I, but no sound came forth. Then he was gone, the bell ringing with his departure. I sat at my little table shivering. What was I doing? Matthew was a married man with children. I would not be that other woman. But there was something between us, and I wasn't sure how we could carry on suppressing it. When I was in Paris, I had known Armand would break my heart, but Matthew, he would break my resolve, which was much, much worse. The solution came with the postman the following morning. A letter with the return address printed on a gold label on the back of the envelope filled me with excitement. Huddersfield Library. I had written requesting access to their vast collection of papers, manuscripts, and letters, specifically those pertaining to the Bronte sisters. The owners, Alfred and William Law, were two self-made industrialist brothers who grew up near the Bronte family home and had acquired some of their manuscripts from a literary dealer. I was taking my first tentative steps as a literary sleuth, thanks to Sylvia igniting the passion for a second Emily Bronte novel at the Shakespeare & Company. There was just one problem. I would have to return to England to investigate further. It was a risk, but now it seemed even more of a risk to stay. I had to put some distance between myself and Matthew. Besides, did I want to pour all my energy into another doomed liaison or concentrate on my work? I nodded in the affirmative. My work. That was where my true passion was to be found. I considered the logistics. The Huddersfield Library was in Rochdale near the Laws factory. That was over 200 miles away from London, so I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. I thought of Emily's poem, No Coward Soul Is Mine, and without realizing it, had already made up my mind to go. I really felt as though I was leaving Opaline Carlyle. The girl behind Miss Gray would become the woman I always wanted to be. As I glanced out into the street, I noticed that the stained glass patterns had shifted and were now the shape of a vast and rolling moorland with a path leading up to the grand farmhouse. Wuthering Heights, I whispered to myself. Chapter 20, Martha. I began to read the book at night. There was something sacred about those quiet, dark hours that made it feel special. I lit some candles, despite Madame Bound's repeated warnings against it, and arranged some cushions on the floor. It felt a bit like a seance at times because the strange noises in the walls wouldn't stop until I settled down to read. The branches spreading across the wall were now freeing themselves from the plaster, and I half expected to find leaves growing. Instead, a new book appeared. Normal People by Sally Rooney, the book I had seen at the library. It was Madame Bowden. I didn't know how she was doing it, but with her theatrical background, anything was possible. It was quite sweet, actually, her quirky ways of encouraging me to read, if only she knew that I was carrying someone else's story on my skin. Another line had come to me that morning while I was polishing the floors. I knew my mind wouldn't rest until it was inked on my skin permanently. I had no idea what the story meant, how long it would be, or whose words they were, but the biggest mystery was why they were being told to me. I could never tell anyone. Hearing voices was definitely still frowned upon, as far as I knew. But that was just it. I wasn't hearing a voice as such. The words just showed up. A Place Called Lost was a much simpler story to understand, and it seemed to be written for children, which suited me fine. At least in children's books, nothing terrible happened, and if it did, it always got fixed by the end. It told the story of an old library in a remote Italian village. It was so remote, in fact, that it was said only people who wandered off the beaten track had become hopelessly lost could find it. A charming wooden building, it held ancient volumes stacked from the floor to the ceiling, arranged without apparent order. The guardian of the library was so old that no one could remember a time when he had not been there. Yet one day, as he locked the outer gate at the end of the day, a violent storm blew up out of nowhere, and the poor old man was hit by lightning. However, that was not the end of the story. Still wayward travelers would stumble across the faraway library, and despite the guardian's absence, would find themselves drawn to a certain book, and upon reading it, find the course of their lives completely changed. It was as though the library itself, the very fabric of its being, could intuit which book would help a lost soul to find their true path. Oh, I like this. But the locals feared what they did not understand and wanted the library destroyed. Trying to... gotta rearrange myself. Where was I? Okay. They believed that the building was haunted and the spirits were trapped within the pages of the books, waiting for a reader to set them free. And so it was that the books were taken out and dispersed across the land. But before the building was knocked down, a young man on his honeymoon arrived with a proposal. He would take the wood to build his own shop in Ireland. I knew this story was no mere coincidence. In fact, sometimes when I slowly read the enchanting lines on each page, I felt as though my entire life was an elaborate plot line that would now somehow make sense in this context, in this place, with these people. Person Henry. Okay. I could already feel my ability to read him fading, and I knew what that meant. My judgment was becoming clouded with that one emotion I could no longer afford to have, love. Before I blew out the candle, I read a line that made up my mind. In the story, there was a young woman who came to the library, miles away from her true home. She read a story about a girl who had come to a fork in the road and was so afraid of making the wrong decision that she stayed where she was, huddled in the hollow of a tree. After several days, an old woman came along and told her a riddle. She asked, "What is something you create, even if you do nothing?" The answer was a choice. Choosing not to do something was still a choice. I was choosing not to register for college because I was too scared. What I hadn't realized was the fact that I was actively choosing to stay stuck where I was, which scared me even more. I'm going to move this up a little bit. Sorry, guys. There we go. I know that was a little shaky, and I'm sorry. The following morning, I rang the admissions office and arranged an interview for the very next day. I felt empowered, strong, terrified, and excited. There was no going back now, I assured myself, and hardly thought anything of it when the doorbell rang after I had served Madame Bowden her breakfast. I opened the door with a spontaneous smile on my face, which fell the moment I saw him standing there. It was too late to run. Besides, he had that look about him, the remorseful one, where he would promise me a brand new start. I spotted the crumpled bouquet of flowers in his hand. Even they looked brittle and half-hearted. I knew the routine. We had been through it so many times before. I felt my body becoming heavier as I came closer to him, the weight of being around him already crushing me. "How are you?" he said bashfully, head lowered. All innocence. "What are you doing here, Shane?" He opened his mouth to speak, but then overriding thought came to me. "How did you find me?" "A mate of mine was up for the day, shopping with the missus. He spotted you." "Where?" "On Grafton Street." "So?" "I was trying to calculate it in my head." "How did he know I lived here? Did he follow me? Was it Mitch?" I didn't even have to ask. I knew it was Mitch. He was Shane's best friend, and would have thought nothing of spying on me. "Look," he said, taking a step closer, which caused me to step back. He seemed visibly upset by this, as though my fear of him was an overreaction on my part entirely. "Martha, does it matter how I found you?" "It does, actually. Do you think it's normal to have your goons following me around?" "Mitch isn't a goon, Jesus." A couple walked past and gave us a wary glance. "Can we go inside?" he asked. "I just want to talk." I didn't answer. I wanted to say no, go away, leave me, and never come back. Forget about me, pretend I never existed, but nothing came out. I just turned away, looking at the street. "Your mother hasn't been well." My head spun around to look at him. "That's why I came. She wants you to come home." "What's wrong with her? Is it serious?" "Serious enough she's in the hospital." "Jesus Christ." My hand flew to my chest. It was as though all of the oxygen had left my body. I felt woozy, like nothing was real anymore. Not the buildings or the street or my flimsy life here in Dublin. He took my arm and I no longer flinched. It was Shane. He knew me and I knew him. Regardless of what had happened between us, he was here to help me. I looked in his eyes and I could see the sadness that was there when his father died. He knew how I felt. He wanted to help. "Okay, come in," I said. I walked down the hall towards the stairs leading to the basement, but when I turned around, he wasn't following. "I live in the flat down here," I said, pointing to the stairs. "Geez, it's a nice place, isn't it?" he said, putting the flowers down on the console table and wandering into the front room. "You can't go in there." He stepped out of my eyeline. After a few moments, I followed him in. Madame Bowden was out, so I figured there wasn't any harm. "Was it an accident, or is she sick?" I asked. "What?" "Oh, it's cancer." My legs went weak, and I sank back on the sofa. I couldn't believe it. It felt like a waking nightmare. Why didn't she tell me? I didn't expect him to answer. I was simply trying to make sense of it. How could she? "None of us knew where you were. You didn't even leave a note, Martha. I was so worried about you." "Were you?" I knew I shouldn't have said it. I could read his face like the weather, and the comment made him angry. A flash of him beating me with the head of a mop came unbidden. My arms wrapped around my ribs instinctively. He turned his back on me and he walked slowly around the room. "You've done all right for yourself, though. I can see why you might have forgotten your family." "It's not like that." This was so twisted. I felt myself needing to prove that I still loved him, just to keep things civil. But I didn't love him. I fucking hated him. I stood up and walked towards the door that led to the hall. "Where are you going?" "I'd better pack a few things. What hospital is she in?" "The regional." He had delayed just a beat, but enough to raise some doubts. "Who are you?" I heard Madame Bowden's imperious voice from behind us. She was standing in the doorway that led back to the parlor. I hadn't heard her come in, and I had to fight the urge to hug her for the impeccable timing. She held her walking stick like a weapon waiting to be wielded, then a support. "Another friend of yours?" "Oh, God, don't say it like that." This is my husband, Madame Bowden." I was shivering all over. I didn't think anything bad would happen while she was there, but I couldn't be sure. "Husband? Good grief, you kept that quiet." I wish she would just shut up. She was making everything worse. I was immobilized. The past and the present were colliding in the front room, and no one seemed to understand how terrifying that was. They continued to exchange barbed pleasantries, and I just stood there, my mind racing to nowhere. I found myself wishing that Henry was here. "Well, we'd best be off," Shane said, walking towards me and taking me by the arm. I remembered this, how it looked normal because no one could see him digging his finger into my skin. "Oh, where are you off to? Somewhere nice?" Boolies do a lovely lunch menu. Back to Sligo. Martha's mother is in the hospital, so I'm taking her home. Madame Bound looked genuinely sad, although I couldn't tell if it was sympathy for me or for the fact that she would have to make her own breakfast. She was unpredictable in her moods at the best of times. Kind and gentle one minute, cold and uncaring the next. I couldn't rely on her to get me out of this. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, she said, her eyes lowering to where his hand grasped my arm. I have to pack some things first, I croaked, my voice breaking. There's no time for that now. We have to beat the traffic. I said I'm sorry to hear that because Martha can't possibly leave today. No, I'm afraid I have a very important supper this evening and I cannot do without her. I'm quite sure she can make her own way there in the morning. We have a very reliable public transport system, she added, enjoying how he visibly squirmed at her interference. Her mother is seriously ill. I think that's more important than your supper or whatever. I looked from one to the other. I didn't know what to do. I'd like to hear Martha's opinion on the matter, if you don't mind. She was giving me breathing space, and I had to grasp it, at least until I could find out for myself what was going on. I better stay here for tonight anyway, I said, despising the pleading tone in my voice. 5 minutes with Shane, and I was already back to the frightened girl hiding in a wardrobe. I hated him for making me this way, but I hated myself too. Why couldn't I be stronger? He shook his head and widened his eyes in disbelief. Nice to see where your priorities lie. It's my job, Shane. I'll call home tonight and be on the first bus down in the morning. There, you have your answer, Madame Bound said, stepping in front of me. Don't call a house. There's no one home, obviously. It seemed as though he was giving up. What else could he do with her there? He took one last look around the place, then filled his mouth with saliva and spat on the floor before walking out and slamming the front door. My lungs exhaled, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for who knows how long. The relief of his absence was spoiled only by the embarrassment I felt in front of my employer. I'll clean that, I said, reaching into my apron pocket for a cloth and walking away quickly so I could hide my tears. Martha Winter, you'll do no such thing, she commanded. I think it's time you told me what exactly is going on. Okay. The end for now. So we left off on chapter 149, or page 149, chapter 22. Wow. So Shane found her. Do you think her mother has cancer? Like, I don't know. Maybe she does, but he's still the one controlling everything. Yeah, so we shall find out. Thank you guys again for being here, and thank you for just dealing with my absence on some days, because moving and with 5 kids too and their last days of school is very tiring. I am tired. So after this I'm going to film another quick video, which I'm very excited to do. But I hope you guys really are enjoying this as much as I am. It puts you into a place of wonder, and I really, really enjoy that. But I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.